thank you for that incredibly warm introduction. Thank you for welcoming me back. I'm always thrilled to be back in New Orleans. New Orleans is actually where my parents met. So I'm very happy. Were it not for New Orleans, I wouldn't be here. You know, I understand Phil Robertson's been in the house. I'm told that a senior White House aide came to President Obama and tried to explain the Duck Dynasty phenomenon. Said it's a show about a God-loving family of gun owners that are small business people that love America. And his response was, he said, "Oh my God, what is it, a fantasy show?" And the aide responded, "No, it's a horror film." But you know what? We're in a part of America that doesn't happen to be located on the coasts that actually understands the values we were built on. It is great to be with you. You know, at this prayer breakfast, this is a time to reflect on our shared religious history, our shared religious liberty, our shared traditions in America. And what I want to do for just a few minutes is talk about the first protection in the Bill of Rights, the very first protection that all of our other liberties depend upon, and that's religious liberty. We're a country that was founded by men and women fleeing religious persecution and coming to a country where every one of us could seek out the Lord God Almighty with all of our heart, mind, and soul, free of the government getting in the way. And we have never seen a time where religious liberty has been more in peril than it is right now. We've seen the IRS targeting people of faith, targeting pro-Israel, targeting pro-life, targeting conservatives, targeting those who act on their faith. We've seen the Air Force, an Air Force chaplain last year, who wrote in a blog posting, "There are no atheists in foxholes." He was reprimanded for saying that. He was instructed by his commanding officer to take that down. Apparently it was deemed insensitive to atheists. You know, I kind of thought it was the job of a chaplain to be insensitive to atheists. To welcome them into the forgiving arms of a loving God. Amen. It's very interesting, though, the origins of that phrase, "There are no atheists in foxholes." That comes from a 1954 speech that President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave to the American Legion. A man who, I might note, had some passing familiarity with the military. In the course of that speech, he described what are known as the four immortal chaplains. The true story of the USS Dorchester, that in World War II it was going around the coast of Greenland, and it was hit by torpedoes from a German U-boat. And as the Dorchester began sinking, they realized to their horror there were not enough life vests on the ship. The Dorchester had four chaplains, two who were Protestant, one who was Catholic, one who was Jewish. And each of those four chaplains, when they realized there weren't enough vests to go around, each of them took his vest off and put it around the neck of another man. And they stood arm in arm singing hymns as the ship went down. And the origin of that phrase, "There are no atheists in foxholes," is when they were doing that, they didn't ask the man in front of them, "Are you a Protestant? Are you a Catholic? Are you a Jew?" They simply handed their life vest over and gave it to their brother so that he might live and they might die. That's the origin of the story. That is our incredible shared religious liberty and commitment to principle. And that's what we're seeing imperiled every day. A couple of months ago, I had the privilege of being at the U.S. Supreme Court the day the Hobby Lobby case was argued. It was actually incredible. We had a rally out front. The blizzard was coming down. We were standing in the blizzard, rallying for religious liberty. If you look at assaults on religious liberty, one of them is embodied in that abomination called Obamacare. Amen. The question in the Hobby Lobby case is not whether individuals can access contraceptives. There's no disputing they can. The question is very, very different. The question in that case is, can the federal government force Americans to violate their religious liberty and force them to pay for abortion-producing drugs for others? Right now the Obama administration is litigating against the Little Sisters of the Poor. Little Sisters of the Poor is a Catholic convent of nuns who have taken a vow of poverty. These nuns spend every day caring for the poor, providing health care to the elderly. And right now, the Obama administration is litigating against the Little Sisters of the Poor, trying to extract millions of dollars in fines from the nuns because they're not willing to pay for the contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs of others. How through the looking glass have we gone? Look, here's a good principle for the federal government. Don't come after nuns. See, for government, you've got to keep it real simple. That's just a good baseline rule. If you're coming after the nuns, you've probably done something wrong. But it's not just here at home that religious liberty is under assault. I just flew back yesterday from spending a week abroad, spending a week in Israel and Ukraine and Poland and Estonia. And all across the world we see religious liberty in peril. I'll tell you, having spent 2 days this last week in the nation of Israel, one thing that is unequivocally clear is America should stand with Israel. Jay Leno a few months ago had a joke. He said, America and Israel have an unbreakable bond. How do we know this? Because for 5 years, President Obama's been trying to break it. That's Jay Leno. But you look abroad at what's happening with religious liberty. How many of y'all are familiar with Pastor Saeed Abedin? Yeah. Pastor Saeed is an American who is right now languishing in an Iranian prison. He was in Iran building an orphanage. So he was questionable right then and there. And he's been sentenced to 8 years in prison in Iran for professing his Christian faith. Now, Pastor Saeed used to be in the Evin prison, which is a notorious prison in the bowels of Iran. While the federal government was negotiating with Iran this terrible, terrible Geneva deal that is setting the stage, I fear, for Iran to acquire nuclear weapons capability. Right in the middle of those negotiations, Iran decided to transfer Pastor Saeed from the Evin prison to the even more brutal Rajai Shah prison. That's their death row. It's where they keep the worst of the worst. They did it on the anniversary of Iran taking Americans hostage in 1979. It's what's known as Death to America Day, which they celebrate. I'm going to suggest to you that was not an accident. that they transferred Pastor Saeed to Rajai Shore on Death to America Day. I've had the opportunity to sit down and visit with Pastor Saeed's wife. She's got 2 little girls she's raising right now on her own in Idaho because her husband is languishing in that Iranian prison. But I'll tell you an incredible story. You know, God is bigger than all. And in the time Pastor Saeed has been in that prison, he has led literally dozens of Iranian prisoners and prison guards to Christ. Pastor Saeed's wife told me of an experience before her husband was sentenced to prison where the 2 of them were brought in front of another Iranian prison guard, and they were being threatened with death if they would only renounce Christ. And they said, no, I can't do that. And the lead guard who was interrogating them, he asked everyone else to leave. They all left. And he sat down at the table, he looked at them and said, tell me about Jesus. It's a reminder that in much of the world, religious liberty isn't an abstraction. It is a vital life and death, God-given natural life. You look at Nigeria, over 200 little girls that have been captured by Boko Haram. Radical Islamic extremists who kidnap little girls and sell them into sex slavery. What a horror. You know, Heidi and I have 2 little girls. Can you imagine the horror of the mothers and fathers as their little girls are captured by evil, radical terrorists? And by the way, we're not going to compete against and defeat radical Islamic terrorism if we have an administration and a president unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. Or one other person to think of, Miriam Ibrahim. A woman in Sudan, married to an American from New Hampshire. She's got a 20-month-old son. She and her son are in a Sudanese prison. She was with child. This past week, she gave birth to a little girl in a Sudanese prison. Now, what is her crime? Her crime is that she's a Christian. Her crime is that she's a Christian. In Sudan, they have sentenced her to die. To be flogged 100 times and then hung by the neck till dead. For the crime of being a Christian. This mom, Miriam, in a Sudanese prison right now with an infant girl and a 20-month-year-old son. And she's told she can avoid the sentence if she will simply renounce Jesus. And she told her captors, I can't do that. Religious liberty is precious, it's real, and it is foundational to every other liberty we have. As Americans, as believers, as men and women of faith, we're called, number one, to pray. This is a prayer breakfast, and now, if ever there has been a time for prayer, now is the time for prayer. Now is a time for prayer for our nation, for our leaders. Now is a time for prayer for renewal in America. Now is the time for prayer for the nation of Israel. Now is a time of prayer for Pastor Saeed Abedin. Now is a time for prayer on our knees for those 200-plus little girls in Nigeria, for the hell they are enduring because of evil on this earth. And now is a time for prayer for Miriam Ibrahim and her 2 little babies. But now we are called not just to prayer, we are called to stand up and speak out. To stand up and speak out and put action to our faith and our principles. Who has this wonderful ability to make the left's heads explode. But my father is a pastor, and I want to close with a story that he has often told from the pulpit with regard to salvation, but it applies in many contexts. It's the story of a tightrope walker who erects a tightrope over a gigantic waterfall, and a crowd gathers around to see him. And the tightrope walker asks the crowd, he says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back?" The crowd cheers, and he doesn't. He says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back pushing a wheelbarrow?" The crowd cheers, and he doesn't. He says, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back pushing a wheelbarrow with 2 100-pound bags of sand in the wheelbarrow?" The crowd cheers, and he doesn't. He said, "How many of you believe I can walk across this tightrope and back with a man in the wheelbarrow?" The crowd cheers, and he points to a man in the front row and says, "Get in the wheelbarrow." And the principle of the story, of course, is that believing is not sitting there quietly doing a golf job. Believing is taking everything you have, your body, your heart, soul, and mind, taking everything and diving in. Believing is getting in the wheelbarrow. Yes. That's what we are called to do as believers. That's what we're called to do as Americans. Is to speak up, to stand out, to pray, and to get in the wheelbarrow. And I am honored to be in a room of patriots committed to doing exactly that, to turning our nation around and to preserving religious liberty in America. Yes. Thank you.